All right, my friends, if you ever needed proof that there's a bubble in higher education, I'm going to share with you this article here today. Man, I'm telling you, you're going to have to look, I got 3 kids coming up. I got 1 in college now, 3 kids behind them. You're going to have to make a hard, convincing argument that's worth getting $100,000 in debt to get a piece of paper that says you have a 4-year degree in some kind of history or social science of some sort. You just can't make that argument very often, very distinctly anymore. That would lead me to follow that path in this day and age. Let me show you why. This is nuts. So welcome to Heritage Wealth Planning, place you come to learn all about higher education. I don't know, but man, think long and hard before you send your kid to your alma mater saying, oh, I went to the University of Georgia. You should go too because you're going to get so educated and have a great job. Those days they're coming to an end, especially when you have $100,000 in debt. In fact, I'll tell you what, I was just reading today in my feed. You always got to be careful on these news feeds because they're very biased to some degree. But this was an interesting one. There's one. Let's see if I can't find it. It might not be on here anymore. About education. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to find it. That's too bad. But just basically said because people have so much in debt, they're having a hard time buying homes, and it was going to hurt the real estate sector. And the real estate sector is huge. And I don't see it on here anymore. That's too bad. There's a Bloomberg article. I have to revisit that. Hold on just a second. No. See it. Okay. Nope. All right. Anyway, so let's dive into this. This is from chicagobusiness.com, Crane Chicago Business. I'm not sure. This might be through the University of Chicago. I frankly don't know. But anyway, it's interesting. Why the University of Illinois is insuring itself against a drop in Chinese students. Proving you can insure just about anything, the University of Illinois has taken out a policy to mitigate the risk of a decline in Chinese student enrollment. Now, there's more that meets the eye here. I'm telling you right now, don't just think this is about Chinese and Trump trade war and all that. I get all that. There's more in here, and this could be more problematic for these universities. So let's just dive into this, and I'll tell you what my thoughts are in a second. Importing students. The number of Chinese students at the University of Illinois Champaign campus had been rising for a decade before it peaked in 2017. This for grad and undergrad students. So it was up to it's almost 6,000 in 2016, down about 200 in 2018. Look, it's still going up. It was going up from 1,800 in 2009 all the way up here. But anyway, let's read this. Way before Trump began the trade war. Really, did Trump begin it or did the Chinese begin it? That's just, University of Illinois administrators began worrying about the school's increasing financial dependence on Chinese students. Well, the administrators should be, because a lot of those administrators are not performing any value. I mean, I was reading the other day that the University of Michigan has 16 diversity counselors. 16. Insane. When newly appointed College of Business Dean Jeff Brown addressed faculty for the first time in September 2015, he noted the risk of having so many of the college students come from a single country outside the U.S., namely China. What if they stopped enrolling? Afterward, a finance professor colleague suggested they try to hedge that exposure. I said, says Brown, I'd love to, but I don't think such a market exists. And with the help of another professor and former Chicago trader, Morton Lane, they founded the market. And in 2017, the University of College of Business and the College of Engineering jointly signed a $600 million insurance policy, $60 million insurance policy that protects the colleges against a sudden disappearance of Chinese tuition dollars. This was a first and is really bespoke policy, says Andrew Martin, a British broker. I don't care. As universities across the U.S. increasingly grapple with state funding pullbacks and those in the Midwest confront a decline in local students, they've creating degree programs, housing options, and other infrastructure that cater directly to foreign students, especially from China. What do you think the Chinese pay when they come to the United States? You think they're paying in-state tuition? Discovery Partners Institute Research Center in Chicago around international exchanges, the insurance contract as an experimental and expensive tool that may or may not ultimately brace against a sudden reversal of the Chinese student fortune. Universities recognize the issue and its magnitude, particularly at the public universities. They can't replace the students, and there'd be a massive restructuring if they abruptly lost them, he says. One historical example, he notes the exodus of Iranian students from the U.S. after the country's 1979 revolution. The number of international students rose 1.5% in 2017 to about 1.1 million, with a third coming from China. They contributed $42 billion to the U.S. economy by way of their spending on tuition, room and board, and other expenses, the report says. Still, the rise in students leveled off recently, with the number of new arrivals declining in 2017 for the second consecutive year. Aside from the tension with China, again, due to the Trump administration negotiating on trade, the president's protectionist approach has rippled through the U.S. visa program, making it more difficult for some foreign students to study or work in the U.S. China's response has also had an effect. Rijin Bian, who graduated from Illinois with a computer science degree last month, notes that the Chinese government's recent decisions to stop funding graduate student scholarships and says, I believe the number of Chinese students will decrease as a result. So the number of Chinese students that come here getting full ride from the Chinese government will decline. Blame Trump or not, it doesn't matter. Or you could blame the declining Chinese economy, or you could blame maybe the lack of the education attainment that these guys get in the United States, because our educational system is an absolute mess, focusing on silly stuff. Gender studies for physicians, physics departments and physicians area. I think that's just, why would the Chinese government increasingly want to pay for that stuff? I mean, think about it. Chinese government, they're not going to say, look, we need you to get a degree in physics from your local MIT, and part of that tuition is going to pay for gender studies. No, they're not trying to do that. They know what's going on. They see higher education as being just a jobs place for administrators and mid-level executives and bureaucrats. Why would the Chinese government want to pay that? I completely get that, actually. It has nothing to do with Trump. I mean, a little bit probably, but mostly has to do with the fact they're saying we don't value these degrees nearly what we used to before they had all this silliness that's going on here. I mean, just these schools are just, I literally sit there and it boggles my mind how idiotic they could be, taking such a good brand. What if USAA, let me just give an example. USAA, they all started saying, I don't know, we support Jane Fonda, sitting on a North Vietnamese tank. I mean, that'd be just, you're sitting there with mind boggling. And this is the equivalent of what U.S. educational institutions are doing today. They're the equivalent of being USAA corporate and sponsoring the Jane Fonda Peace Initiative to go to the NBA and sit on a tank. It boggles the mind. I mean, and I tell you, couldn't happen to a nicer group of people too, because these people on college campuses today are absolutely, a lot of these people are just despicable, horrible. I mean, you're telling people they can't, it's nuts what's going on there. And it's, so as an American with 4 children, I sit there and said, why would I want my kids involved in that stuff? If they want to do it, more power to them. But as a Chinese government, you're like, why would I want my kids involved in that stuff? And why would I pay a full ride? At least for me, because we pay the taxes, we can get into state schools relatively cheaply relative to a Chinese student who's saying, I don't want to be part of that stuff. That's insane what's going on in American education. And I'm not going to pay the full price for that. University of Illinois Champaign, the biggest university in Illinois, has 6,000 Chinese students enrolled across its colleges this past fall, including undergraduate and graduate students. That's more than half of the 10,766 total international headcount. And the school is a top sponsor of international students nationwide, ranking 6th for the school year, according to the Institute for International Education. Plus, Chinese applications for the fall coming up are up again, says the spokeswoman for the university. Well, Chinese applications is different than actually people who matriculate. The College of Business, the concentration of Chinese students in graduate programs like master's degrees in accountancy and financial engineering is particularly high. Of the college's 2,700 graduate students, 500 are in 500 are from China. In some of the master's degree programs, Chinese students are a majority. All right, so think about that. And some of the master's programs at the University of Illinois, Chinese students, not Chinese Americans, Chinese students are in the majority, paying the full ride. At some point, that can't continue on. Lane, who leads the school's financial engineering program and runs the Chicago insurance consulting business on the side. Isn't that great? Runs a Chicago insurance consulting business on the side while being hoity-toity at the university. It must be a nice gig if you can get it. Help develop the insurance approach and make the Lloyd's connection. I would recommend that the school continuously do it as long as they have a concentration of revenue coming from a source that can be interrupted by government. I would recommend the school continuously do it as long as they have a concentration of revenue coming from a source that can be interrupted by the government actions or a pandemic, he says. Whose firm, Lane Financial, didn't provide any services on the policy. Yeah, but I guarantee they got paid. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. If all the colleges, Chinese students left overnight due to geopolitical causes or a pandemic, the insurance policy would pay out $60 million to compensate for the lost tuition revenue. It covers partial losses too, but only if the school has a combined Chinese annual tuition revenue decline of 18.5%. So that's kind of how the contract is set up. And I just don't care. Using the contract to cover two colleges with a disproportionate number of Chinese students provide better terms than just a single college. But trying to include the whole university might have slowed an already lengthy 18-month process. Who, again, talk about the contract, essentially the option that they're buying there, an insurance policy. They're literally hedging against the Chinese enrollment declining. Illinois private peers, Northwestern and the University of Chicago, both of which have significant foreign student populations, opted not to enter into the policies. Northwestern evaluated them and made the decision not to purchase for a variety of reasons, top among them the expense. Still, the Trump administration recently intensifying battle with China, stoking more interest. All right, so I mean, at the end, it's all, I get it. Like, they want to blame Trump. Trump's just a guy who finally stood up. But at the end of the day, what's happening here is these universities are relying so heavily now on foreign students. And when that foreign student spigot is turned off or even just turned down a little bit, it's going to have a huge detrimental effect on college funding. No other way around that. No other way around that. And this cannot keep going on. In fact, it's interesting because domestic-born people are just dropping in terms of number of people to go to college. There's going to be a heavier and heavier reliance on foreign students. Foreign populations are beginning to shrink as well relative to getting older and whatnot. And so as that happens, it's going to be just a lessening for sure of the amount of people going to these universities. And so these huge tuition payments, these huge revenue sources that they're getting on top of what they're doing to their own brand, is just going to make it even worse. I mean, yeah, maybe 10 years these guys are fine. But, you know, if you want to look into, there's schools going bankrupt all the time. Private liberal arts institutions are losing it. And, you know, frankly, they should. I mean, they're paying all these administrators to offer silly classes for a huge price. I mean, it's like going to the doctor's office now. You don't know what you're going to pay until just what they put on the website doesn't mean anything anymore. Now, I got no sympathy. I mean, this is what you've done to yourself, my friends. You've taken a wonderful, wonderful brand, American higher education, the just uniqueness of it, the ability for thought, the ability for critical thinking, the ability to experiment, try new things, and it's just ruined it. They absolutely have. And so now you're turning around saying, well, especially men in particular, they're not going to college anymore. And so what's happening is you're getting more and more social sciences, which don't pay the bills. There's just not that many jobs for social science majors, less and less going into STEM points. And then you're getting more automation and whatnot as well. And so you're heavier reliance on the foreign population, which in of itself has less of a population growth for going to schools, especially in the United States, when the costs are going through the roof. I mean, it's just, you can see this a mile away. And so what's going to happen there is then you're throwing these sillier social engineering things, and less and less people are going to be inclined, or especially governments, brutal, tyrannical governments like Chinese, to support that stuff. And so because of that, it's going to be less and less. And that's the bubble, my friends. That is the bubble. So as you're sitting here today, you might just say to yourself, is this really the best we can do for higher education? Should we really go into debt, little Janie, so you can get a degree in communications from, I don't know, whatever school you're looking at going to? Because if it costs $150,000, that's $150,000 opportunity cost that you'll never get back for that degree in communications. Some will, yeah. Most won't. In fact, you'll be riding that debt for a long, long time, maybe never to pay it off. And you can't write it off in bankruptcy. And the question you have to ask yourself, what exactly did you learn? Well, you got some piece of paper. I'm telling you, 10 years from now, it's not going to mean anything. It just won't, because everyone realizes what's happening. And people say, I need someone who can produce today. I can't wait to train somebody who's a know-it-all from college on my dime. I need someone who can produce today. Someone's a go-getter, someone's who highly motivated to learn. And I'm really to pay on-job training for that person to do this. And, just because you have a nice degree from, Podunk University, it doesn't mean anything to me anymore. It just doesn't. And that's what's happening now. And so just be careful. There's more. You can read all kinds of articles on the schools that are going out of business. I don't find it frightening at all. I find it good. As good as capitalism. Creative destruction is what Joseph Schumpeter used to call it. Creative destruction. The more we destroy the current contingents, what's out there right now, the more creative we get. We destroy to create and build better and better things. That's what's happening now. So it's good. But I thought it's interesting nonetheless. So as always, you like what you see here. It's just a little rant on me. Don't forget to subscribe down below, a comment, thumbs up, questions, and we'll see you guys next time at Heritage Wealth Planning. Thanks now.